This is a video record of our trip to England from July 28th to August 10th, 2005. This is part 1. In this part, we spend 4 days with Jane at her house at Exeter. During that stay, we visit Stonehenge and the towns of Torquay, Cockington, Dartmouth, Linton, and Lynmouth. We also see the Palace of Hampton Court. Before I begin, let me tell you the genesis of how we came to plan this trip. In the summer of 2004, I took Robin on a guided bus tour of Great Britain to celebrate her 50th birthday. During that trip, we saw the countries of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. We also got to spend an afternoon and evening with our friend from England, Jane Bodell. We enjoyed the 2004 trip so much that we decided to do a modified version of that trip in 2005. This time we would concentrate on seeing London and southwestern England. The trip would coincide with my 60th birthday, and we might have an opportunity to see Jane again. Before I booked our trip, we called Jane to tell her we would be returning to England that summer. We also told her we would love to see her again and asked if that would be possible. Jane answered emphatically, yes. Not only did she want to see us again, she wanted us to spend 4 days with her at her home. She even offered to pick us up at the airport, bring us to her house, and drive us back to London after our stay with her. As if that were not enough, Jane also said that she would like to celebrate both our birthdays during our stay. With that in mind, we decided to arrive on July 29th, a couple of days before Robin's birthday. Now that we had confirmed our stay with Jane, my next task was to plan our time in London. Since I had used the travel company called Insight to book our trip through Great Britain the year before, I decided to use them again. I consulted their 2005 brochure and found an 8-night self-guided package of London. The package included transfers to and from the London airport, a 5-star hotel with daily breakfasts, and 3 one-day travel cards for 2 that were good on subways, buses, and trains. The total cost of the package was $2,000, which was a fraction of the cost of the 2004 trip. This package seemed right for us, so I booked it. Now that everything else was settled, I was ready to book our flights. We had not been happy with our flights in 2004, so we decided to spend a little more money on the 2005 flights. The flights I booked were non-stop LA to London and back, and our seats were in business class. So it was that on the morning of Thursday, July 28th, we finished packing and had a leisurely breakfast and lunch. Our flight didn't leave until early evening, so we didn't have to rush to get ready. Unlike most of our previous trips, we decided to take a flyaway bus from the valley to the airport. We caught an early afternoon bus and arrived at the United Airlines terminal at around 3 o'clock that afternoon. We checked in and dropped off our luggage. Then we went to the United Club, aka the Red Carpet Lounge, for first class and business travelers.
It's July 28th. We're leaving for London to meet Jane. We're in the Red Carpet Lounge. Having a free cocktail.
We boarded our plane at 5:15 that afternoon and quickly realized that our seats would allow us to stretch out. That would give us a better than average chance to sleep on the flight. Here is Robin's comment on the seats.
This is unbelievable.
We pushed back at 5:50.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
Just after we took off, they told us that the flight would take about 9.5 hours, which would get us into London Heathrow at about noon the next day. About 2 hours after we took off, they served us dinner. We each had filet mignon with all the trimmings. Despite having the best seats we ever had on any flight, neither of us were able to fall asleep. Finally, we each took 2 sleeping pills, which did the trick. We slept about 3 or 4 hours. We were woken up by a flight attendant to serve us breakfast. By now, it was the morning of July 29th. Before I had a chance to fully wake up, I realized that I had double vision, no doubt the result of taking 1 too many sleeping pills. That was really scary. I had breakfast, and by the time we began our approach, my vision cleared and I was fine from that time on.
Flight attendants prepare for landing, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. The local time is exactly midday.
After getting off the plane, we went through customs and got our luggage. Then we found Jane and her daughter Natalie. As we were leaving the terminal, we saw actor and comedian Bob Newhart. He had obviously been on our flight from LA. We asked him if we could get a picture with him, and he graciously agreed. After the photo op, we walked to Natalie's car and loaded our luggage. As we were leaving the airport, Jane asked if we wanted to stop at Stonehenge, the 5,000-year-old astronomical observatory. We had seen Stonehenge on our 2004 trip the year before, but thought it might be fun to see it again. It's our first stop, Stonehenge. While there, we got the first of many pictures we would take with Jane and her family. We also got a few pictures of ourselves. After seeing Stonehenge, we continued on to Exeter. When we arrived at Jane's house, I noticed that she called her house Half Acre, very British. It was in an upscale rural neighborhood and quite lovely. By the way, this is Jane's car. Jane knew that her car could not hold all of us and our luggage, so that's why she asked Natalie to use her car to pick us up. The inside of Jane's house was as classy as the outside. Her backyard was like a miniature park. The house had a spare bedroom upstairs, and this was where Robin and I slept. The guest bathroom was downstairs. Later, Natalie's husband Mark came over, as did Jane's other daughter Melissa with her fiancé Michael. That night, Jane made us all dinner. Later, we gave Jane gifts that we had brought with us. The gifts were our thank you to Jane for her hospitality. The next day, Saturday, July 30th, Jane, Natalie, and her husband Mark took Robin and me on a brief sightseeing tour of towns near Exeter. All the towns and Exeter itself are in Devon County in southwest England. We left Exeter at about 10 o'clock that morning. The first town we visited was called Torquay, made famous by the British sitcom Fawlty Towers. There were many quaint shops and stores, so we had plenty of opportunities to learn about converting English pounds to dollars.
Where are we?
Hello. Torquay.
Torquay.
Yes.
Jane talk. I always like it when she narrates.
It was wonderful to have friends who were so nice and knowledgeable, taking us around unfamiliar places. We next drove about 2 miles west of Torquay to the quaint little village of Cockington. This town has the best examples of thatched roofs in all of England. This is a close-up of one of the roofs, which is dried straw. Here are more examples. After we walked around the village, we had lunch at this tea garden. After lunch, we came upon this horse and carriage. Robin struck up a conversation with the horse, and before we knew it, we had purchased tickets to take a ride on the carriage.
Traditional English game.
Just after our ride ended, we stopped briefly to watch a cricket match. We next walked to a place called Cockington Court, which was a series of small craft manufacturing outlets, including a glass blowing business. It was fun to watch the artisans at work. During our time there, I noticed that Jane had stepped away from us for a few minutes. She caught up with us later, carrying a small brown box. I didn't think much about the box at the time, but I would learn of its contents the following evening. After Cockington, we drove about 10 miles south down the coast to the town of Dartmouth.
See the building on the top? That's Dartmouth Royal Naval College. So that's 100 years old today.
To get into town, we had to cross the river on this small car ferry.
Dartmouth. We just got through crossing over on the ferry. Interesting place here.
So there's lots of tiny little streets because all the grand houses would be like the merchant houses. The traders, all the back to the sailors.
As we were walking around, we met this very friendly policeman, or bobby, as they're called in England. At around noon, we stopped at this pub to have lunch. It is called the Cherub and is the oldest pub at Dartmouth, dating from 1380. Because it was so small inside, and because it was so crowded, we were only able to get drinks, which we had to enjoy outside. As we were leaving Dartmouth, we saw this sailing ship. I learned later that it is a luxury cruise ship called the Sea Cloud II. It holds up to 90 passengers and sails around the Mediterranean in summer and the Caribbean in winter. Our last stop of the day was about 10 miles south of Dartmouth at a place called Slapton Sands. Toward the end of World War II, the Allies used this beach as a training location for the D-Day invasion. In that exercise, the Army practiced deployment of an experimental float device for American tanks. The device did not work real well, and many tanks sank in the ocean. One of those tanks was discovered recently, brought ashore, and placed on display at this location. This was that tank. I'm sure that Mark took us there because he knew of my interest in the war. Sunday, July 31st, was Robin's birthday. We had a leisurely morning, after which Jane drove us into downtown Exeter. The first place Jane took us was the Exeter Cathedral, completed in 1401. As we walked around the cathedral, we noticed that parts of the exterior reflected its age, while other parts were less affected. While the exterior of the cathedral was impressive, the interior was even more so. We arrived there just as the morning service was ending.
Hymn number 324.
Within a few minutes, we were able to wander freely around the cathedral. Upon leaving the cathedral, Jane took us to the much smaller but also much older St. Martin's Church, which was just a few yards away from the cathedral. Next to St. Martin's is the Ship Inn. It is one of the city's oldest and most famous pubs, dating back to the 15th century. Supposedly, this was where Sir Francis Drake of circumnavigation fame loved to come in for a drink. We next walked about a quarter mile to an area called the Quay. It was a collection of shops and restaurants at the edge of the River Exe, which flows through Exeter. The old city wall adds an element of charm to this area bustling with people and live music. As we walked up the hill from the quay, I noticed more of the old city wall. The wall is interesting because it consists of much older sections from the times of the Roman occupation, intermingled with medieval repairs. By mid-afternoon, Jane drove us back to her house so we could all rest up. That night, all of Jane's family returned to celebrate Robin's birthday. Since Robin and I would be in London on my birthday, they also celebrated my birthday that night. We each got some wonderful gifts. Robin got a bracelet, a set of 2 crystal goblets from Edinburgh, a bottle of Chanel No. 5, a photo album, and a picture frame. Then it was my turn. I got 2 picture books about Devon County, a man's version of Chanel, and a gorgeous glass paperweight that Jane had purchased when she disappeared the day before at the Cockington Court glass factory. After we had opened all our gifts, Jane took everyone to this Exeter restaurant for dinner. Of course, no birthday dinner would be complete without a birthday cake, and the one Jane had ordered was brilliant. What a fabulous shared birthday event that was. After we returned to Jane's house, Robin called Clark, and then she called her mom. The next day, Monday, August 1st, Robin and I were gifted with another sightseeing trip. This time it would be Jane herself who served as chauffeur and guide. But just as it was on our arrival 4 days earlier, Jane had the problem of a car that was too small to comfortably accommodate the three of us. Jane's solution? Rent a larger car. Brilliant. For this trip, Jane decided to take Robin and me to the northern coast of Devon to see the neighboring towns of Linton and Lynmouth. Unfortunately, the drive took us over some windy roads, and that always makes Robin nervous. About an hour and a half after we left Exeter, we arrived at Linton. Linton is a little town on the cliff above Lynmouth, which lies where the Lynn River empties into the ocean. In this picture, Lynmouth is not visible because it is below Linton. We arrived around noon, so the first thing we did was find a place to have lunch. We chose this restaurant. Luckily, the people seated at the front window left a few minutes after we arrived, and we got their table. That's Robin in blue taking our picture from outside the restaurant. This was our introduction to an English treat: clotted cream, jam, and scones. To put it mildly, we loved it. After lunch, I got this parting shot of the restaurant before we started our exploration of Linton. The first important building we saw was the Linton Town Hall. Next to the town hall was this old church that had been converted into an arts and crafts center. We next walked down this road. In the middle of the block, we saw this magnificent B&B, that is, a bed and breakfast. It was called the Victoria Lodge. A sign posted near the entrance said this was the only 5-star B&B in Linton. We next walked past this art gallery and then on to the St. Mary the Virgin Church. We took a few minutes to view the inside of the church. Then we walked outside where we could look down on Lynmouth. Our next task was to navigate our way down to Lynmouth. For that, Jane led us to the Linton-Lynmouth Cliff Railway, built in 1888. The incline made Robin a little hesitant, but she got in the cab anyway, and down we went. In just a few short minutes, we had arrived at the bottom.
Okay, now we're in Lynmouth, and Linton is there on top of the hill, and we're down at the bottom of the hill, and we're at the ocean.
The beach there is called Blacklands Beach. It is a very rocky beach, as you can see. Of course, we had the obligatory photo shoots. After Blacklands Beach, we started back to the village of Lynmouth. We stopped at a bridge across the River Lynn, and Jane told us the story of the Lynmouth flood, which occurred on August 15, 1952. On that day, a huge storm hit the Lynmouth area. The storm dropped 9 inches of rain in 24 hours, causing the river to flood. Overnight, more than 100 buildings were destroyed or seriously damaged, and 34 people died. Of course, today there are no signs left of the flood. We did some shopping in Lynmouth, then we started back to Exeter. Later that afternoon, Jane asked me if I wanted to take a test drive in her car. Of course, I jumped at the chance. With Jane in the passenger seat, we were off for the drive of a lifetime. What a kick! The next morning, August 2nd, marked the end of our stay with Jane. It had been a marvelous time and we hated to leave. As promised, Jane would get us back to London, but again would rely on Natalie to drive the four of us in her Honda. Just before we left, Jane suggested that we make a stop at Hampton Court before dropping us off in London. Hampton Court, one of the old royal palaces, is on the way to London and is definitely worth seeing. On the drive to Hampton Court, Robin and I got a real thrill as Natalie drove a little over the speed limit. Just a smidge. The drive took us about 2.5 hours. Hampton Court was quite a place. It was completed in 1694 and was the primary home of King Henry VIII. Hampton Court was built to compete with the French Palace of Versailles. The interior of the palace was very impressive, but they didn't let us take pictures inside, so I had to get these pictures off the internet. The grounds around Hampton Court were the best part of our time there. Everything was immaculately maintained and groomed. All the greenery made every picture of us a prize winner. Then to put the icing on the cake, a few minutes after we started walking around the grounds, the overcast gave way to bright sun and mostly blue skies. At one point, Robin asked me to take a fun picture of her, so I had her pose behind this ornamental vase. Right after that, Jane got this picture of the two of us basking in the sunlight. It seemed like there was scenery to be shot behind every tree and bush.
See that tree, Robin? That weeping willow?
When we were getting ready to leave Hampton Court, Robin found this idyllic sunken garden. We took turns posing in front of it. After shooting these pictures, we started back to Natalie's car. On the way, we passed by the River Thames, which flows past Hampton Court on its way to London about 20 miles to the east. It was a relatively short drive to London. Natalie had a little difficulty finding our hotel, but eventually she found it. It was midway between the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace. Our hotel was called the Crown Plaza St. James. After a tearful exchange of thank yous and goodbyes, Jane and Natalie started back to Exeter. Robin and I checked in at the front desk of the hotel and then walked through the outside courtyard to our room. The room was very comfortable, but not as big as we had hoped. The bathroom, however, was first rate. After resting up and showering, we left for a very brief tour of some of the London sights. The hotel was just a few blocks from Buckingham Palace, so we walked there first. After taking some pictures, we walked about half a mile around the outside of the palace grounds to the London Hard Rock Cafe to have dinner. The only problem was that the cafe was closed due to a fire they had a couple of weeks before. Undaunted, we walked a little further and found this pub. We had dinner there in homage to my dad's restaurant, also called the King's Arms. After dinner, we walked another half mile to Piccadilly Circus, so named because it is a circular hub where several streets meet. The last place we walked to was the Prince Edward Theatre, where they were holding performances of the new live version of Mary Poppins. I had bought 2 tickets off the internet to see the play before leaving LA. I had bought the tickets for a performance toward the end of our time in London, but I wanted to see the location of the theater so we would not get lost on that night. At this point, we were very tired and didn't feel much like doing any more sightseeing. We started back to the hotel. On the way, we passed through Piccadilly Circus again and got some night shots there before setting off again. We finally made it back to the hotel and crashed.